بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وأسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم. نرحب بكم ونحييكم في هذه الورشة المباركة لتصنيع البلازما واليقظة الدموية. نحن سعداء. طبعا هذه الافتتاحية كلمة افتتاحية بسيطة إن شاء الله، يتبعها إن شاء الله افتتاح الساعة 12 الافتتاح الرسمي للمؤتمر. أعرف بنفسي، أنا محمد السهلي، عضو مجلس إدارة جمعية دمي، ولنا كل الفخر أن نشارك مع وزارة الصحة في تنظيم هذه الورشة. سعداء بالتواجد معكم، سعداء برؤيتكم، سعداء يعني وجودكم معنا في هذه الورشة. نتقدم بجزيل الشكر لجميع من شارك، خصوصا الرعاة والمنظمين وكذلك الحضور. So we'll start in English. So it's our pleasure to welcome you today for this workshop, which is plasma fractionation and hemophagocytance. It's our great pleasure to contribute in organizing this workshop. I would like to thank all the contributors in this, particularly our sponsors. And it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Hind Al-Hamidan, who is the chair of the scientific committee of this workshop and CEO of Blood Transfusion Operation Services at Ministry of Health. So welcome, Dr. Hind.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد. I would like to welcome all our distinguished guests. We're so happy that we have all our guests from all the Arab worlds here today. We're really thrilled. Welcome to Saudi Arabia. The official opening ceremony will be 12 p.m. So we'll just start the scientific program now, and then we will stop like 10 minutes before 12 for the opening ceremony. Welcome all. It is my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Leni Bonsdorf. She is the Executive Director of the International Plasma and Fractionation Society, IPFA. She has more than 30 years experience in plasma-derived medical products, and she held the executive position at Schengen, Finland, and worked with R&D at the Finnish Red Cross Blood Services. Dr. Leni will be talking to us today. She has two talks today. The first one is Introduction to Plasma Fractionation, the process and the product. And then she will, the second talk, probably in the afternoon, is IPFA view on a country plasma strategy involving the public sector. Please, Dr. Leni, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Hind, for your kind introduction. I first want to thank the organizers and the Minister of Health for inviting IPFA to this meeting. It's an honor for us to be here in Saudi Arabia. For me, it's my first visit here, and I hope I will have a glimpse of your beautiful country. Yesterday it was a bit dark when I arrived. So let me introduce myself. I'm Leni von Bonsdorf. As mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the IPFA, the International Plasma and Fractionation Association, and I will tell more about our association in my second presentation, because my first one will be more introduction into the plasma fractionation world for you. I also noticed we have some speakers who couldn't join us today, so I might pick up some items which are not directly mentioned on my slides and elaborate a little bit more about the subjects that they can't cover when they are not here. So let me start really tell you what is plasma fractionation. I thought that this first presentation would really be an introduction. And I start with something which is, of course, always important, the demand. Where did it come from? Why do we need plasma-derived products? And I take it through different drivers. It can be a crisis, which I start with, and we have other drivers which have put us in the position where we are now with the plasma fractionation. But the crisis driver, what was the first crisis that made us think about plasma-derived products? Well, it was actually during the Second World War, when there was a war situation and it was difficult to transport blood products to the fighting field. And already before that, a man called Edwin Kohn had started to develop methods how you could store plasma and use plasma. And he also started looking into, can you get the proteins out of plasma? For example, albumin, which you can give as a volume expander. And he had started these methods in his lab in Boston, setting up the methods how you can extract this albumin from plasma. And when the Second World War came in, you wanted something that you could store, keep in a bottle, and use quickly for the soldiers. So the first driver was the crisis, the war. And actually you can say about albumin, the development of albumin, closer, thank you, okay. It was a very quick product development. The first lab batches were made somewhere in the summer in '41. Then they were shipped to the first bombing during Pearl Harbor in December '41 during the Second World War. And there they were tested for the first time in the field, actually. And if you see when the product was approved for clinical use, 5th of January. It was less than 1 month of clinical trial and approval. I don't think we see that very often in the pharmaceutical industry today. But they really this trial really showed that albumin worked in this situation with the soldiers who had suffered and had especially burns and edema, and it saved many lives. Later, Professor Kohn, or Dr. Kohn, he described this process in a paper, Preparation of Serum and Plasma Proteins, a system for separation. And this was in '46, it was published, and it's very strange that this method is very much the basis we still use today. So it has long traditions. So of course, it's not just the crisis that drives it, it's always the treatment. What treatments do we need with the plasma-derived products? Again, I take a picture from Kohn's original paper because I think it's very beautiful. They were very good at describing things with writing with hand at that time. Many of the treatment options that we still use plasma-derived products at that time were described very early. We knew a lot about plasma proteins at that time already. And as you can see, albumin here at the bottom, which forms the substantial part of the plasma protein used for plasma volume maintenance and other reasons. And you can also see the important proteins for blood coagulation, already known that they are needed for hemophilia treatment, etc. But today, what are the main therapeutic areas and the proteins for them? I think many of you are familiar with these proteins and what they are. And I've here tried to divide them into three main groups because I find these are the most important ones. For the rare diseases like hemophilia, of course the coagulation factors, factor 8, factor 9, von Willebrand factor, fibrinogen, are crucial and very important and have saved a lot of patients as plasma-derived products. IGG, today in red because it's really the one that you can't do with any other means than extracting it from plasma, is used for primary and acquired immunodeficiencies and of course for certain neurological and other hematological conditions. Then we have the more rare proteins for C1 inhibitor, for example, used for hereditary angioedema and alpha-1 antitrypsin, inborn errors with patients who lack these products in their bloodstream. Then we have another category of plasma-derived products that are more used in the hospital setting and in intensive and emergency care. Still albumin there, since the Second World War, used very much as a fluid volume replacement or in liver diseases. And we have some smaller products like the prothrombin complex, PCC, which can, for example, be used for reversal of warfarin. Still to mention today, when we a little bit think about also crisis situation, the hyperimmunoglobulins. With the COVID pandemic, they were sort of reinvented again. People were realizing that hyperimmunoglobulins can work and that they are very important proteins. And there were a lot of attempts in our industry to test if we could use plasma, convalescent plasma from COVID patients to treat other patients. It turned out it didn't work for this disease. It was not used for this, what is it called? Well, the one that you do with breathing. Was not so effective. But anyway, it waked up us again that we have to have preparedness maybe for future pandemics, also to treat with hyperimmunoglobulins. Still today, we need them for example, anti-D of the newborns. Hepatitis B, varicella, tetanus, rabies, hyperimmunoglobulins are really essential proteins and are still on the list of essential proteins of the WHO, as are most of the other plasma proteins. So they are important, very important life-saving medicines still in this world. Then we can also look a little bit what has led us to today, innovation drivers. I think because I'm going to talk about the plasma fractionation process, it's important to understand a little bit about the innovations behind it. And I brought up 3 examples which I think are very important for this industry and how it has shaped it today. One of the first inventions I want to bring up is really the cryoprecipitate, which was actually found by Dr. Judith Graham Poole already in 1964. She found out a very, very simple method just by thawing plasma. You can get a cryoprecipitate that contains a lot of factor VIII and von Willebrand factor and fibrinogen, which is sort of a first concentrate for factor VIII for treatment of hemophilia. It's still a very elegant process. It's cheap, you can do it easily, and it's still used all around the world. It's still incorporated in most fractionation processes in large-scale operations as well. And it's also, today it's brought up like alternative method that you can produce pathogen-reduced cryoprecipitate at very small scale with medical device systems. And this can be done in blood establishments as a really first step if there are really no other treatments available. So it also gives the better safety margin to the patients. So cryoprecipitation is really an innovation. We have to be happy that this doctor found some 60 years ago. Another innovation driver is really the safety of PDMPs from bloodborne viruses. Without these methods, we wouldn't have the safe products we have today. This finding out how to do the virus reduction and virus removal within the process really was triggered also by a crisis with the HIV pandemic in the 1980s, when people realized that now we really need to find methods that we can make these plasma-derived processes safe, that we are not transmitting any bloodborne diseases through the blood, through these products, which unfortunately happened when there were not knowledge and not methods in place. I mention here 2 of the most important methods today from the innovation perspective. The first one was discovered was the solvent detergent treatment. you use a solvent and detergent to break the lipid layer of enveloped viruses. You can see how they explode in the solution. It was discovered and patented by the New York Blood Center in the 1980s, and they had a very good patent on it, which I think they lived on for many years, because all the fractionation companies really needed this in their processes. It was a very efficient method for the HIV virus as well. The other method, which is really a state-of-the-art method and used in every large-scale fractionation, is the virus filtration here on the left side. It is a method whereby viruses are removed through a filter. So you can see the little IGG molecule, maybe you can't even see it, so small. It goes through the filter, whereas the viruses with different sizes can't penetrate it. And this is also a very robust and very safe method, and we can be very happy that this exists, because it doesn't really matter what sort of virus you have. As only thing is that it has to be large enough that it doesn't go through the filter. So very good method and an important innovation. The third innovation driver is really recombinant proteins and monoclonal antibodies. You may ask why I put it on this list, because it's not a plasma-derived product. But when these products were starting to come or were discovered in the 1980s, how you can make monoclonal antibodies and recombinant proteins, some people thought that, well, in a few years we will not have any plasma-derived products at all. At least I started my career in that time, and that was what I was told, that we are going to do everything by recombinant technique. But of course, it's not the case. We wouldn't sit here today if that was the case, because we wouldn't talk about plasma-derived medicines. But they are really important, the ones that are made with recombinant techniques. For example, the coagulation factors here in this table. And in this way, by using these techniques and making some of the products through recombinant techniques as well, it has shaped our industry a lot. So these are not maybe the main demand anymore. In the 1990s, really the factor 8 was the driver for the plasma fractionation industry. Today it's IGG, because IGG we still can't use. Polyclonal IgG we can't produce through recombinant techniques. There are attempts to have some sort of proteins similar to this, but at the moment we don't see that we can fulfill all the needs that the IgG what IgG can really provide with recombinant or other techniques. And of course you can see there has been a huge number of proteins which have been produced over the years, both by those who work in the so-called traditional plasma fractionation industry, also by other large pharma companies. And today we can see the development going further. In the last 10 years, some very many new types of products with prolonged half-life were introduced. And now we see really that what we talk about replacement therapy, when we give the product that the patient is lacking, is not longer the only way to treat the patients. We can also use the emicizumab, Hemlibra product, which is a bispecific monoclonal antibody, which so-called bypasses the system. And this has been a tremendous impact on treatment of hemophilia around the world. So and all of you have also heard about gene therapy, so maybe in the future this is also shaping up how this industry will work. But as you see, they are more related to specific products, specific coagulation factors. We might see more of them also coming from like the type of products like C1 esterase. There are recombinant products. So these are the drivers which have really shaped us to where we are today with the plasma fractionation. And as this is a workshop around how you do plasma fractionation method, my next part of my talk will be more about what is the fractionation method. I took down from my bookshelf some of the books I have and put them on my floor and took a picture of them. As you can see, it's been written since Korn's days. I have this in the middle, which is from the 1980s, Methods of Plasma Fractionation. And then there is a big book which is considered by many a very important Bible from 2010 on production of plasma proteins for therapeutic use. So you can understand I will not be able to cover all these things in this talk, but I'll try to give you some outline of the basic process and how it has evolved. I noticed that Thierry Burnoff, who was supposed to be here and talk about more modern concepts, he's not here, so I'll try to pick in some ideas also on what is really used today. This is my presentation is more on the large picture. So this is something I really like because I'm actually an engineer by training. I have worked with the process development, and I've even worked on the factory floor with these processes. So looking at these pictures always brings me back to good old days, and I like the big tanks that you need and the systems that you need to put up, and it's a long process. And as you can see here from these snapshot pictures of starting with the cutting of plasma in the machine, going through the big tanks of the corn ethanol fractionation, making the final purification in chromatography. You see the blue color is actually also coming from a plasma protein. It's the blue ceruloplasmin, which is a copper protein in plasma, and it sticks very hard to chromatography. So when you do this kind of work in the factory, you can see all sorts of rainbow colors in your columns. Very exciting for a process developer. You can also see the rack with the virus filtration hollow fiber filters put into the process, and of course the important last part, the filling and the sterile filtration and filling of the product into bottles. So we talk about fractionation, and by that we mean how to purify different proteins in plasma and make them into pharmaceutical products. This is the so-called classical fractionation scheme. We call it the fractionation because the plasma is divided into fractions, and it comes from the old Korn fractionation method that he developed in the 40s, where he used ethanol as the most important product solvent to precipitate the plasma proteins. So he had fractions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each one of them you increased the amount of ethanol and changed the conditions a little bit and the temperature, and by that way you could be able to utilize as many of the proteins and get them into different fractions. It's still, I keep it here more on the left side, it's still the backbone of most of the fractionation processes. But it's not the only thing. With the fractions, you don't have a purified protein, and you need a lot of steps after that. And actually, if you look at the first proteins at the top, the more labeled proteins, coagulation factors, etc., you need to take them out before you add any sort of ethanol, because they would not be able to cope with that amount. So factor 8 and fibrinogen, as I told you many times, produced through cryoprecipitate, then the other coagulation factors there. And also in red, the immunoglobulins are today very important, coming from the so-called fraction 2 and 3. And fraction 5 is in principle albumin, purified albumin, which you then also have to handle to get it into the final product. So it's really important to understand that there is the backbone of the process, but then each protein follows a dedicated process with many more steps. And this is by permission from a company, just to give you a snapshot of what the processes could look like in real life. You can see at the bottom all the types of products going from albumin, factor 11, hyper-IGs, IgG, coagulation factors. So many steps, so many dedicated virus inactivation steps, so that actually what I mentioned about the ethanol is only a little bit on the top of the picture, and actually the big work and all the polishing steps and the specific purification steps are then described in this picture. So you can also understand that this is a complex process to run. If you change something, for example, if you want to change some conditions somewhere, it will affect a lot of other products. So that's why many times this type of process in our industry is quite stable. People get stuck with them because simply it's so difficult with the pharmaceutical process. If you change something, it has a impact later on, and you have to be sure that you can cover all the safety and explanations for it for your regulatory bodies. Let's see. Here is very short an example of an IGG process, how it could look like. I put this one here because I was actually active in developing it when I was working at the Finnish Red Cross Blood Service. Exactly this process was never taken into use, but it's published and available, so people can look. The bits and pieces are there in most of the methods today. As you see, you start from the corn fractionation 2+3 in the beginning, and then you go to the IGG process, where typically nowadays in large-scale process you use caprylic acid. It's an octanoic acid. To purify the IgG, there are some impurities you don't want to have in the final product when it comes from the fraction 2+3. And many times you have to follow up what is happening with IgA. You don't want to have a high IgA level. You don't want to have the anti-IB antibodies. You want to be sure that it doesn't have any unwanted thrombotic products in it, proteins in it. So there are many reasons why you need a small, more defined purification of your IgG solution. And then you have the nanofiltration, which is the virus filtration, very important for the virus removal and safety of the products. You need some formulation together with ultra and diafiltration. And by this process, you typically have a product of pure IgG. And then depending on the formulation, you can make it into subcutaneous form or an IV form. And I think every fractionator in this world is looking at this step in particular with the eyes of yield of IgG. And as you want it as high as possible, you want to be sure that you have most of your IgG already in the fraction 2+3, and then that you don't lose anything, because IgG is valuable, and you want to have as much as possible from it in plasma. We typically talk about yields in our industry as amount of proteins per gram of plasma, which in my opinion is not very good, because plasma can also have varying starting amounts of IgG depending on how you collect your plasma. So I would have preferred to see it in percentage of the plasma starting material. But what we talk about when we make calculations and economical calculation, that at least the plasma process should give 4 to 5. 5 is really a typical amount nowadays when the methods have been polished from each liter of plasma. Considering that typically plasma can contain about 8 grams per liter of IGG, that's a mean value, can vary. And talking about the plasma fractionation, as theory is not going to be here today, we can't omit the virus inactivation removal methods, which I also already mentioned that they have been one of the innovation drivers. It started already in the 1960s with pasteurization methods of albumin, when there was recognition that there was transmission of hepatitis viruses through it. And it was introduced in the 1960s, and pasteurization is still the method used for albumin to make it a very safe product. In the 80s, there were low pH treatment, dry heat. It means that you have a lyophilized, freeze-dried product which you treat with heat, and so in that way can destroy the viruses. But it's not always very easy to handle for very labile proteins. But as I mentioned earlier, the SD treatment was introduced in 1987, made a huge impact, as well as the virus filtration in the 1990s. And the methods that have been developed over time have become more gentle with less impact on the protein structure, meaning that you can actually use them on very labile proteins like the coagulation factors, which can't handle very stressful situations. And obviously I put at the bottom that ethanol and caprylic acid, actually the Korn's ethanol is a very good virus inactivator, for example, of HIV. That's why we have never had transmissions of HIV through albumin, because it's processed with 40% ethanol. But they are still contributing, and the caprylic acid in the IGG process is also a very good virus inactivator. So a little bit what is needed of a fractionation facility. I just took this as a picture from one of our IPF members, the National Bioproducts Institute in South Africa, so you could have a picture of what it looks like and what it can be. We have of course many of them around the world, but it is a considerable pharmaceutical facility where you need to have all the logistics of a pharmaceutical plant in it, and I will tell more about this. This is just as a starting point. Saying I was an engineer, I start with engineering points to consider. It is a typical pharmaceutical. It needs all the GMP requirements of pharmaceutical production. Hygiene standards have to be very high. We talk about biological solutions where if you are not really careful, you can have nasty experiences. So very good control of the whole process is needed. And what is, of course, when you think about plasma-derived products, they are all infusion products. So they really need a very good sterile filling capacity and filling equipment, which is really top level. And some of them even need the lyophilization techniques, which is always a tricky step in the production. You need to have all the demands on utilities like water for injection, clean rooms, ventilation, everything that is needed of a factory. A point to consider if you really start fractionation is that ethanol is a solvent, and it also puts some certain requirements on your facility that it has to be able to handle this kind of explosive products. And having worked with these products myself, filtration, 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 that's the only thing you do when you work with plasma fractionation. You always have clogging filters everywhere. Comes from the fact that the plasma proteins in our blood veins contain a lot of fat and other things that makes life hard for a process developer. And a little bit about the facility. It needs a high investment for construction. I will come back to this in my second talk later today about the investments for this kind of enterprises. But you have to, of course, also realize that it needs maintenance for many, many years. It's not something you build and then it runs. You need to really keep it up and keep it in shape. And for this, there can be a big barrier if you don't have trained workforce in your country or in your facility. So it has to be available all the time. So what are the capacities and sizes of the facilities? What I think it's important to understand, you can have a capacity in plasma, but you might not make all the products out of it that you could to the full capacity. You might make the IGG to the full capacity, like and the albumin, but the others you might do in smaller processes, and each fractionator have different sizes of these specific products. So there is not one facility which is has the same capacity of the others. And it's also governed by the process scale you have. It's much, as I said, it's determined also by market and market access situation. And you wouldn't make factor 9 more than you actually need it for treatment of hemophilia B patients. So you don't use all the factor 9 in your process, probably. To understand that how much plasma you need from a small factory is really something that uses less than 100,000 liters per year. And the large fractionation facilities, the pharma companies around the world have fractionation plants with several million liters of plasma per plant. Generally considered, if you want to start building something, that in order to reach economy of scale, at least 200,000, maybe 500,000 is needed to be able to operate such a facility. And we can't talk about plasma fractionation without discussing also the quality requirements, GMP requirements, and that they are not only for the facility but also for the plasma. The plasma that you use for the fractionation has to be collected and processed according to GMP requirements. So it's not sufficient to have an improved production unit if the plasma for fractionation is not of GMP quality. And again, the GMP requirements for plasma for fractionation, this is very important. It requires both that your national blood collection system is qualified according to this, and also that the one who is fractionating it in the plant has qualified it according to their rules, because if they are in another country, they might have a little bit different rules than you have in your country. And so there is quite a lot of quality aspects that has to be considered, and it's really beyond my possibility to go into all the details on this in this presentation, but a very important point. When we talk about plasma fractionation, we many times talk about toll and contract manufacturing, and with that we mean that plasma from one country is sent abroad to a fractionator who uses it for manufacturing of PDMPs, and then the products are sent back for domestic use. There are very many different types of toll manufacturing contracts, so it's not always that you get exactly the same products back from your plasma, but it can be. So you can't say exactly what is the best one. But it's typically something that is done for volumes of plasma of 50 to 200,000 liters. If the volumes become larger than that, you almost have your own fractionation plant. Yes, I'm really at the end of my talk here. And important to understand if you go into this, I think the agreements really tell a lot about what you need to think about. You need a commercial agreement. You have to understand how you deal with the products and the plasma in it. And of course, the quality agreement, as I mentioned before, it's really, really crucial that you know exactly what is needed and what you go in for. In addition, when you have the PDMPs, you need to set up some sort of pharmacovigilance agreement with the fractionator so that you can also trace the products back. So there are pros and cons with toll and contract manufacturing. The good is, of course, you don't need to build your own facility. It gives you quicker access to PDMPs. But the first step is really to ensure that the local plasma fulfills all the requirements needed for fractionation, the GMP. And what is good, of course, it's a way to learn also for your system and get the gap analysis on it at the same time. But then, of course, the negative side, if your need for product increases, it might be really hard to increase the capacity. It depends on the fractionator, and it might be that their pipelines are full for many years, and you can't just simply fill it up with more plasma. Product ranges might be limited. And, of course, it can be that you don't want to depend on a third party and import of products. So again, going towards full-scale, domestic, regional fractionation. So when can you start thinking about having your own fractionation? Well, I always said when there is certainty that you have sufficient plasma and of appropriate quality, and preferably over 200,000 liters per year is needed. And that also that there is an infrastructure that supports this sort of high-tech pharmaceutical production with all its requirements on hygiene and GMP. And thirdly, it is a long-term enterprise. It's an investment for many, many years. And you also have to be ready to understand it has a lead time of at least 3 to 4 years from planning to operation. Even this is sometimes optimistic, the 3 to 4 years. I think this is almost my last slide here. So I will come to these items more in my second talk in the afternoon, looking at the plasma value chain, going from the donor to the patient, and all the elements around it that are very important, and how we see it from the public health and public sector perspective at IPFA. With this, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lenny, for this outstanding comprehensive talk that set the stage for plasma fractionation. We'll leave the questions at the end of the session. We will move to another interesting talk for Dr. Ranjit. It will be virtual. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. Dr. Ranjit Ajmani he's a doctorate in biomedical engineering. It seems that you're all engineers in the plasma fractionation, not doctors. I'm very impressed with engineers. He's a doctorate in biomedical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, faculty member at the PGI Chandigarh. He has very extensive experience in blood plasma product and plasma fractionation. He worked at the National Institute of Health, USA, and he established the operation of 2 plasma fractionation companies in India. So Dr. Ranjit will be virtually talking to us about plasma fractionation and protein therapy basics to know. So stay tuned to Dr. Ranjit talk.
So I think the plasma and plasma fractionation, its technical and scientific aspects, I just wanted to say that at many of the forums, I do speak about the business, about the complexity of its operation, etc., etc. But at this forum, I have restricted myself to purely scientific and the technical part of it, in order to make sure we stay pretty much on the on the topic in the sense of it. I understand this entire audience is more related to science and technology, so I think let's do that. So the story of blood and plasma product, I think what we have to remember about blood, it's an essential medicine, and that's why we see that blood saves many lives, not one, and we see the holdings of blood donation camp. And also probably there's no substitute for the blood. If blood is needed to treat patients, there's no other substitute other than blood. And also 1 unit of blood can save many lives. This was not a conventional wisdom. This has come over a period of time. It has evolved very well. And how does it save many lives? So if you see, earlier convention was that you take 1 unit of blood, you go for the RH group, you go for the viral testing procedures, and you can give it to the patient. But what has happened over a period of time within the technology space, and again, this was not a rocket science, it was a pretty much simple separation technique where the blood was separated into red cells, platelets, fresh frozen plasma, and plasma can further be divided into cryo-poor plasma and cryoprecipitate. That means the 1 unit of blood at least can help for different categories of patients. And again, this has happened with a simple application of technology. When we talk of technology, we are not necessarily talking about the rocket science. We are talking of any process, any technical method which may help the community, the society at large, is a technology because it enriches the society from one or the other perspective. So these 4 different components of blood can help 4 different degrees of patients, and that's where it happens. But if you look at the plasma, over the globe, this number may vary, but at least in the larger context of Asia, only 20% of plasma is clinically utilized, while the 80% of the plasma remains unutilized in the clinical setting. But this may vary from country to country, setup to setup, seasons to seasons, etc., etc. So what do we do with the plasma? This is a very, very important thing which one has to look. So one has to remember that plasma is one of the costliest fluid on this earth, more than a barrel of a petrol. And it is a store of many life-saving medicines like albumin, immunoglobulin, factor 8, factor 9, etc. Specific antibodies like rabies, tetanus, etc. also is present in a special kind of plasma. And it is also contains specific antibodies to the natural response like Zika, Ebola, and now we have enough seen during the COVID time. And if this plasma, which is a storehouse of so many proteins, so many important medicine, if it is not used, it's a criminal waste as a society. And it's a huge financial loss to any country, any blood bank, and there's a destroying cost to it as well. And if this plasma is not used for making these products, the country has to import the plasma product, which means you have to incur more expenditure for an exchange of these products. So if this plasma is utilized for the fractionation, it is a road towards the sufficiency of plasma product in the country, and it's surely revenue generation model for the blood bank. So very simple process. If I had to say, you take the plasma, you pool the plasma, you subject it for the fractionation, and these are the products. This look pretty simple in 3 cartoons, but the process is fairly complex. But this I just wanted to start on so that we have some sense, what it is after all. So let's get into more detail. What are these products which come from the plasma? So this impressive list of about 20 different kind of plasma protein might come out. So when we talk of plasma protein, most of the time the product which comes to our mind is albumin and immunoglobulin, and sometimes factor 8. But believe me, these are just the 19 products I have listed it, and there's a long, big list which may come down the line as the technology evolves. So, and these plasma products are used in different clinical medical situations like hemophilia A, hemophilia B, where you use factor 8, factor 9. In case of surgery, you use the albumin, you use sometimes fibrin glue to seal the tissue. In case of PID, again, you use huge amount of immunoglobulin. In case of burn, you use a lot of albumin. In shock and trauma, you use the albumin. In obstetrics and gynae, again, you use fibrin glue, sometimes albumin, and of course, Rh negative. When Rh negative mother, you use the anti-D. In case of animal bite, we use the rabies immunoglobulin. In case of organ transplant, it is the fibrinogen and thrombin. And this is just a very small list which I have presented here. But if you look at like within the PID, there are 400 different indication diseases where the immunoglobulin is used. So that's where, we have to see its wider application both in adult as well as in the pediatric population, in men and women both. So that means these products have a very wider reach in the sense of its clinical utility. So what is the plasma fractionation? Basically, it encompasses a very important component is the raw material, which is plasma. Then its process of production, how it's manufactured. Then there is a process of viral inactivation. And then the final products come out of this. And also, I think it's important to remember there are different types of plasma based on the origin of plasma and based on the storage and processing of plasma. So based on the origin of plasma, one is called as a recovered plasma, which is recovered from the blood bank through the blood donation. So when there is a blood donation, the red cell platelets go away to the patient. There is a plasma which is sitting, which I said about 80% is clinically unutilized, is called as a recovered plasma because it is recovered from the blood bank. Then there is called as a source plasma or apheresis plasma. And in this case, the apheresis plasma is most of the places in the world, other than 1 or 2 countries across the world, the source plasma is a more paid activity, which means a person goes to a plasma center, not the blood center. He or she donates the plasma and he gets compensated for that plasma. And these rules and regulations for source plasma vary from country to country. And it's most of the source plasma come from the 5 countries in the world, which is North America, Czech Republic, Austria, Germany, China, and Hungary. These are the 5 major countries which contribute to about 80% of the global plasma, or more than 80-85% of the global plasma. And this is a paid activity, while recovered plasma is a non-remunerated. And within the source plasma, there is another category of plasma called as hyperimmune plasma. And these hyperimmune plasma have a specific titer and level of antibodies, which is specific to that antigen. So that's why it is called as hyperimmune plasma. Now, based on the storage condition and processing, the fresh frozen plasma, which means a plasma which is extracted and immediately subjected to -30, -70 degrees centigrade, depending again the law of the land. And this plasma is a very rich in factor 8, and this is called as a fresh frozen plasma. From this plasma, if you extract out cryoprecipitate, it is called as a cryopure plasma, a double depleted plasma. Then there's a normal human plasma when the blood is componentized and the plasma is prepared and stored within 24 hours. This is called as a normal human plasma. And this is not a very rich source of factor 8 because within that time frame, the factor 8 depletion happens and you will not be able to make good factor 8. So these are 2 different types of plasma, which I explained. Then how this plasma, which is there in the blood center or in the plasma center, how it migrates to the fractionation site. So typically a fractionating company will do the inspection, audit and approval of a center, and it's a very, very lengthy process. It runs into sometime at least the first time it runs into at least 5 days or maybe 7 days. So it's a very long procedure in which a lot of data, a lot of training record, etc., is inspected, audited, and it undergoes approval process. Once it is approved, there's a supply agreement, which means the blood center or plasma center will supply X quality of plasma to this particular company. And then there are a lot of documents which come along with this agreement, which is a donor list. And this donor list contains a lot of confidential and non-confidential information both. But the donor list remains confidential as far as the fractionation company is concerned, though it does not have the name of donor, but it has the barcode, which can be tracked for the next 20-25 years. So the barcode is designed very specially because the plasma is stored at -20 and in some cases -70. So these are very specially designed barcodes which are used to put it on the plasma bag. Then there's a certificate of quality which contains the information of number of bag, the kits which were used, the method which was used to test the plasma, etc., etc. And this is also there along with this. And there is the invoice of the plasma. And there are more like, the shipment documents, for example, the air bill, etc., etc. So these are the documents which are that is how the plasma moves from blood center to a fractionation company. So each bag is barcoded. Each bag has a very heavy documentation. Each box of these plasma bags is barcoded. So which means there's a barcode on the bag, there's a barcode on the box. So it's a double track. It is temperature controlled system. And there's a map of each box, which means within that entire system, electronically, a map is available where you can locate which box is on the which shelf, on which side, etc., etc. So it's a very, what we talk about the IEML today, these days in healthcare. So this is how it is used to do the justice with the data tracking. Now, at the plasma fractionation site, there are different areas to store the plasma. All right. But most of it, they are maintained either at -20 or less than -20. So -20 is the upper limit if I have to talk about. So there's one area which is called as a received plasma. So plasma comes from the blood or plasma center and it stays in the received area. Then this received plasma undergoes the documentation verification. It undergoes certain more changes from box to the corrugated boxes into a plastic cages, and this plasma is labeled under test plasma. Between the received and under test plasma there is some leakage or there's some problem happens in the transportation, those bags are removed, and the plasma bag which are intact, the barcodes are intact, they are recorded within the system of the fractionation company. These are called as under test plasma. Now, this plasma is called as a quarantine plasma. What is the quarantine plasma? This quarantine plasma concept is there in China, US, and Europe, but it's really not existent in the entire Asian country. And just to give a little more perspective to it, backtracking. Backtracking means you should be able to track each vial to the product, to the bag, each bag of plasma which you use in the system. So this is backtracking system. Repeat donor base. So it's very important, at least where there's a source plasma collection, that for example, in the US, if a person who has come to donate the plasma, let's say on the January 1st, so his plasma will remain under quarantine until the end of February, 60 days. Only when he comes to donate the plasma in the first week of March, his plasma which he has donated on January 1st will be released for the manufacturing. And the reason being, it is considered to be the window period, or a person whose plasma who has donated on January 1st may have viruses which are not detectable. So his plasma of January 1st will be released in the first week of March, provided his results in the March 1st week come clean. Now the plasma which he donates on March 1st will stay in the quarantine phase for the March and for the April, and in the May 1st week, again if he comes and donates the plasma of March 1st will go. And thus I'm giving you a very theoretical example. It's a much more complex process. And this is called as inventory hold, my last point. And this quarantine concept of plasma itself can be a topic of entire, webinar, because it's a very important concept considering the vulnerability of safety of plasma product. And then this plasma is released if it meets all the criteria of the company. And the quality assurance department of particular fractionation company releases the plasma for the fractionation. Right? Now you have a plasma available with you. Now plasma fractionation technology. So there are 4 different kinds of technologies available. One is called as a cone, which is classical technology, which has been used in most of the plants across the globe. About, I would say, 99.5% use the cone and chromatography both, which is a second hybrid model. Third is pure chromatography plant. There are only 3 chromatography based plant available across the world. And then there's a new technology coming based on the charge separation. And this is called as a separation-based technology. But of course, the product from the last technology, separation-based, has not come to the market. So this technology has not been clinically evaluated so far. But its plant is under construction in Australia. So where does it start? So plasma product journey starts during the Second World War, when Pearl Harbor attack happened. And you can see these pictures of December 1941. And so at that point in time, during Second World War, a lot of casualties were there. And these are the pictures of Second World War. And first time ever, the plasma product which was shipped from the Cone laboratory from the Boston to West Coast of America, these products were used, mostly albumin and fibrin glue. And you can see the soldiers, and the albumin was given, their wounds were sealed with the fibrin glue. So this was the beginning of plasma product, where the plasma product were used on experimental basis, and it saves many lives. But that is not end of it. There were many challenges alongside with it. Let's get into that part later. So what is fundamentally cone fractionation? It's a very schematic diagram as I'm presenting it to you. So if you see the plasma on the left side of the panel, so this plasma is pooled into the batch size of maybe 2,000 liter, 5,000 liter. And these pooled plasma undergoes a separation method, series-wise and parallel side. So you can see things are happening in series and things are happening in the parallel. So from the fraction 1, you get the fibrinogen, factor 8, and other component proteins. Then from fraction 2 and 3, you can get IVIG. From fraction 3, you can get antitrypsin, antithrombin, and globulins. And from 4, you can get some more protein. And from the last, which is the fraction 5, you get the albumin. So albumin comes towards the end of the chain in the code technology. I am really not presenting you pictures of chromatography, because this is the separation technology which you run to plasma through a column, and eventually you separate the protein based on certain procedures. So as I said, the cone was developed during the Second World War. And here you expose the plasma to low temperature, different pH, ethanol, resulting into systematic separation of various protein components. And these proteins are purified, and others it is separated into different entities. So what happened during this time, you can see this is a report of 1949, 27 December, Commission on Plasma Fractionation. So if you get into this report, it contains a lot of detail, what happened when plasma was used and how plasma fractionation program should evolve in the country. So this is a very important document if you look at in the milestone and in the history and in the journey of plasma fractionation. So what happened? At different point in time in the history of plasma fractionation, there was a major outbreak of hepatitis B. There was HIV transmission from plasma product, and thousands of people suffered and died, unfortunately. And this led to scientific development that how to make plasma protein safer and safer and safer. And this endeavor goes till today as we are talking, because one would accept the fact that no biological can be 100% safe, especially when it is coming from blood. One can try to reduce the margin of error as much as it can, but it can never be zero, which means a plasma product can never be 100% safe claim on the vial. So one can just try the best, and this leads to a scientific development. So this is a very important book called as a Vial 023. And this book is written by Gary William Cross. And this is a memoir to his son who dies of HIV in North America, I think in early 90s, when the outbreak happened of use of anti-hemophilic factor 8 in the treatment of hemophilia. And unfortunately, his son Brad contracts the HIV. And this is a very, very long story and a very graphic book which describes the journey of a father dealing with, HIV, use of HIV contaminated plasma products and how it goes. And unfortunately, he dies at the age of 15. And in this case, his father is not able to see the pain of his son. And he says he takes his son to hospice, which is, one-way traffic, and people go alive but never return back, unfortunately. And in this book, it also describes how the court battle happened and how 10,000 hemophilic contracted HIV. And I'm not telling you a story of 1960s or 50s. This is a story of mid-90s. So which means how vulnerable this can be. And the book title, and it goes into a corporate fight and the court law, etc., etc. Now, the Vial 023 title comes when there was a deposition happening of a nurse, and by mistake, she discloses that she gives the Vial 023 to Brad. And that established that Vial 023, which was given to Brad, was made up of a plasma which was contaminated with HIV virus. So that's why I'm saying the technology, when we are using it, we have to use it in most judicious way, in a very, very responsible way. And this is just a book to share that experience. But and this unfortunate tragedy of HIV happened across the globe, and many, many hemophilic perished in this unfortunate episode in the history. So there's a public threat of the new viruses as well, because we test our blood for HIV, hepatitis B, C, syphilis, and malaria, and maybe hepatitis A, Parvo B19. But this is still a public threat in the sense of supply of blood and plasma. And also it depends on the geography. And if you look at the high-income countries, middle-income countries, and low-income countries, and the prevalence of HIV B and C, you can see it varies. And you can see the numbers are starkly different between high income, middle income, and low income. So I think this is also a very economic component which we have to keep in mind. And this is not because of the money part, it is because of the entire healthcare structure, awareness, funding, etc., etc. So this also has a relevance to the different socio-political landscape. So how viral transmission can happen? So typically to make a batch of 2,500 liter or 5,000 liter, there are about 10,000 bags or 20,000 bags of plasma are tested. And you can imagine if one bag was not properly tested, or it escaped the safety net, or there was a case of zero conversion, the entire pool can get contaminated. And this is a reality of it, we are talking of it. So that's why the testing of plasma plays a very important role. So each unit of blood is tested for HIV 1 and 2, hepatitis B, C, syphilis, and malaria. This I'm quoting from India, but in most of the developing countries, or at least in Southeast Asia, that is the case. But it may vary in some countries. Some tests are done, some are not done. So what you do is each unit is tested for these 5 markers, and these are all known markers, right? But we also know there is a window period under which we can, detect the virus. And then there's a limitation of technology. Even if you use the NAT or PCR, it's not possible to detect the virus the very next day on onset of infection. So there is a limitation of technology. And the best of the technologies, unfortunately, cannot give you the viral load or virus identification just the very next day or in the next 24 hours. So this is a human limitation which we have to deal with it. Then again, origin of raw material can equally contribute to it. So when we select a donor or a blood or plasma donor, how careful we will have to be. The testing of blood and plasma donation, which I explained. Then epidemiological surveillance of the donor population. And there is enough studies available that epidemiological surveillance is a very, very important part to make the blood and the plasma product safe. And then, of course, the good manufacturing practice. And then the post-donation information system in order to make sure if any donor comes positive, how to defer this donor and not to allow him for the next donation. So, the confidence of screening pathogen is very, very important. And then the window period and seroconversion of certain viruses, and you pool so many bags of plasma. These are the fundamental challenges which we face. So there are methods of viral inactivation. So, and I would say pathogen reduction in one sense, because inactivation is a virus. You kill the virus, you bring the virus to such a level that it is no more infective when it is present into the plasma product. So one method could be pasteurization, and it is called as a weighted. And then there's a terminal dry heat the product, maybe at 70 degree, maybe at 80 degree, maybe 100 degree for half an hour, let's say factor 8. So depending on your cocktail, you design a method in which you are able to kill the virus or the DNA of virus so that it is no more infective. Vapor heat is another method. SD method, solvent detergent method, is considered to be one of the very robust method of killing the envelope viruses, in which typically there's a solvent in which you mix the product and then you add the detergent, and eventually you remove the solvent, you remove the detergent, and the product becomes safe. Then acid pH, you decrease the product pH and you bring down, you inactivate the virus. Irradiation is also one of the method of viral inactivation. Then virus removal, either you can do through the precipitation or chromatography or nanofiltration. I just would like to add here one thing, that typically when you apply a method of viral inactivation in a product, you use the combination of the first site and the second site. So for example, if you are using for factor 8, you might want to use the first as a nanofiltration, you filter the virus, and then you may want to heat the product, dry heat, terminal heat at 100 degree for half an hour or 80 degree for 10 hours, depending on your cocktail. So these methods are used, which is called as a orthogonal method, which means you do not want to use 2 steps of heat or 2 steps of chemical treatment, because that may not be very, very effective. So WHO recommends orthogonal methods. So when you select a method, what is very important? It should be effective for both. Sorry, there is a mistake on the first line. RNA or the RNA or DNA core. It should be effective for both nucleic acid. It should also be effective for enveloped and non-enveloped viruses. It should also take care of known and unknown viruses. It should give high viral reduction, which means when you apply the method, you should be able to remove or kill the virus to the high degree. Then it should not really affect the protein integrity. Otherwise, this method is no more good. And it should also not leave behind any toxic or undesired property or a matter in the protein products. And most important, validation. This method should be validatable, which means it should not happen, you have done it once and you can't repeat it. So this method should be effective every time when you apply the method. So this is called as a validation. So any validated method is implied in plasma fractionation program. So in case of viral inactivation, as I said, you should use orthogonal process, and one is used in process and one is end process. What does that mean? That one method you should be able to apply when the product is under process. For example, nanofiltration. So when you're making the product is not fully manufactured, prepared, it hasn't gone to the vial. So this method is called as the in-process viral inactivation. And end process means when the product is already in the vial and you are heating it, or doing something with that. So that is called as the end process, and which can be dry heat terminal. And eventually you test the final product when it is ready. But again, this is a very generic, I'm using it. This may not be necessarily true. It would vary from company to company. So I'm giving you a very complex slide, but please, bear with me. So from donor, you donate the blood or plasma. And from here, you test the blood for various markers. And then this blood is stored. And as I said, there is inventory hold, there's a backtracking. And then this plasma goes to the manufacturing site. And that is where quality assurance and GMP comes into the practice. And that is where the viral safety, as I said, step number one step of viral inactivation, and second step of viral inactivation. The final product is prepared. And this product undergoes the post-marketing surveillance hemovigilance program. And eventually you can see the donor and patients are connected. So sometimes these patients become the donor in the course of time. So how this cycle from human to human flow, and again, this may look simple on the PowerPoint, but these 8 steps are very, very complex process, and it undergoes a very stringent norm. And this entire process of right from donor to the product is good 6-month process. So, from the day plasma is available in the system and you get the product, it is about 6 months time we are talking about. And again, this is a red market book following my previous slide. This is a book written by Scott. And again, this is a very heart-wrenching saga written by a young professor from the USA. He comes to India and unfortunately one of his students dies in Varanasi and he has to send his mortal remains to his hometown in the US. And that is where he travels the journey in the Southeast Asia, what happens in the medical science. And this book talks about the blood donation, the cadaver, the child trafficking, the organ transplant, the sperm donation, surrogacy, etc. So this is a book which also talks about the ethical part of our profession. And I think this book is a very, very revealing and heart-wrenching. And it also gives us an insight that what can go wrong in sense of the process in which we go through. So why fractionation we should be doing? So blood is a very, very important scarce resource. It is a finite blood amount, and human blood, as I said, has no substitute. An optimum use of blood component is not just an economic necessity, but a scientific obligation. And to do this, componentization and fractionation is the most efficient way, and self-sufficiency for the nation. So that's why we should do the fractionation. And by doing fractionation, what we do is, how do we travel the pyramid? So most important part is you will diagnose the disease, then the product should be available. When the product is available, these products should be affordable. By doing it, you will be able to improve the patient care, which is poor at this moment. And by this, you probably would increase the life expectancy. And I can give you an example of hemophilia. Maybe 20 years back, the average life of hemophilia was maybe 20 years, 30 years in the Western world, 40 years. But now it has crossed more than 60, 65 years. So which means these patients also can lead a full bloom life and they can be a very productive member of the community rather than a burden. So I think this is something, very important for us to remember, that the patient who were leading a very crippled life because of non-availability or affordability or diagnosis of disease, if we are able to do fractionation in our country or travel towards it, we are contributing a huge to the society by helping these patients, which at this moment lead a very crippled life. Their life expectancy is low. The patient care is really, really in a difficult situation. So plasma therapies are really unique. As I said, raw material is unique. It cannot be synthesized. It cannot be manufactured in any laboratory in the world, right? And this is only a branch of biotechnology. From one raw material, you make many products, right? From plasma, you make albumin, IVIG, factor 8, factor 9. But most of the time, one raw material gives you one product. But that's really just opposite. That's different here. The major concern is the viral safety. That's why the plasma has to be safe to make the product safe. As I said, it's a very complex process. It takes about 6 to 8 months. Its manufacturing is very costly and cost capital intensive. The regulatory requirements are extremely robust and stringent. You manufacture for a very small number of people, but really you should not be thinking of it. The statistical number of patients does not really define our goal, because each life is very important if it happens to be you. So I think saving each life should be our goal, but just wanted to make a point that the number of patients may be low when you discuss, but each life is important and our endeavor should be to save every life. And the therapy, again, as I said, for small population, and there are very, very limited number of manufacturers. So there are only about 70, 75 plasma fractionation plants across the globe. And there's a huge untapped market for these plasma products across the globe. So as I said, the technology should be used to bring the social change in order to elevate the lives of people. And what new technology can do? It can provide you better yield. It can provide you alternate material like the recombinant way of working on it as transgenic. It can definitely improve the safety of plasma product. Now more infrastructure is, which means earlier if the fractionation plant would take 5 years to get ready, now it could be 3 years. There could be more tailor-made fractionation plant available based on the various technology platform and processes. Industry academia can also play a very important role. And eventually this social impact will be the change in the quality of life. And that is where our role comes into the play. So if you look at the evolution of hemophilia care, just to give you one example, in 1950, it started with the whole blood. Then came FFP and cryoprecipitate. And then came the plasma-derived factor VIII. Then came recombinant and the transgenic. And then various generations of factor VIII, recombinant factor VIII. And now you will have seen in the recent past, just in the last 2-3 months, the gene therapy has come into existence for the hemophilia B and hemophilia A both. So you can see the impressive journey of about last 80 years that how technology has enabled hemophilia care. And this is something very important to remember. And today from we are talking of less than 20 products coming from plasma, but there are 1,000 proteins at least present in the plasma, and we really do not know their specific clinical activity and how they can be extracted. So this holds a huge potential to increase the list of plasma product by bringing a lot of change in the process manufacturing, also doing R&D work and developing the technology where we are able to extract the proteins which are present in a very, very small quantity in plasma. I think this is my last but one slide, or maybe the last one. So this was the way telephones were used way back, and this is the way now mobiles are used so extensively across the globe. What it has done, you can see a lady in the hut and a bright young lady in urban setting. The mode of communication has remained the same, but it has brought so much social change in the entire world, right? This was the way the movies were shot way back. And in the life of Pi, it's such a technical superior movie where only 85% animated tiger was used and 15% only dyed tiger was used to make this movie. So how the technology revolution is happening in every aspect of our life, and I'm sure you will relate to this the most. This was the way the blood was stored way back, and this is a very elegant way of storing the blood now, from bottle to bag, from a storage to a temperature controlled, computer controlled refrigerator. So I think this technology has changed every aspect of our life, and it has a huge impact on our healthcare and social life. I think this is where the message is that plasma fractionation is a highly technical method, and it can separate proteins from the plasma, and it can save many, many lives if we are able to do this work, within the country and able to help the country become self-sufficient on the plasma product. I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Talk. Technology has really taken us a long way. Thank you so much, Dr. Ranjit. If you hear us, he's online with us. We will move to our third speaker. Then we will have our coffee break. Before the coffee break, we'll have a few minutes for some questions. At the end of the day, we have like 45 minutes for panel discussion, and all the speakers, they'll be with us. So we come with like recommendations how to establish plasma fractionation in a country. So our next speaker is Mr. Fernando Borges. Mr. Fernando is the Regional Commercial Director of Kedrion Biopharma. He's the Chairman of Kedrion Biopharma GmbH in Germany and member of the Board of Directors in Kedrion Turkey, Global Marketing Manager responsible for plasma-derived products, and the Board Director of the Plasma Protein Therapeutic Association, PPTA. He has two talks today with us. Most welcome, Riyadh. His first talk is Plasma-Derived Therapies, Current Trends and Future Perspectives. And in the afternoon, he will have another talk also. Please, the stage is yours.
Good morning. Good morning. So distinguished speakers, distinguished guests, and delegates here in the room, so really appreciated the invitation. I just wanted to thank the Minister of Health and the Blood Bank Friends Charity for the very kind invite. So I'm here representing Kedrion Biopharma, and for this first talk, I've been asked to give you some snapshots about the plasma therapies, primarily numbers. So what we heard this morning, so will be now translated in some numbers, some trends, right? Just to give you an idea about the market worldwide and some snapshot on the key regions, Middle East and Saudi Arabia in particular. I'm part of Kedrion Biopharma, which is one of the global leading fractionators. We have manufacturing plants in Europe, in UK, in Canada, and in the United States. But this afternoon, we'll give you a snapshot about what Kedrion Biopharma is really about. Right? Now, let me start with the first chart. This is really a brief snapshot about my presentation, right? It's a sort of an executive summary, just to give you some perspectives about the growth trends in the plasma-derived therapy, some about the entire worldwide market, the opportunities that can generate further growth, and what challenges are, the future development in terms of consumption, primarily for IVIG, for albumin, for factors, and some regulatory changes that recently were applied in some countries to really improve the market access and the access to those medicines. And finally, some conclusions in particular for Saudi Arabia, right? Some recommendation that might come from a global leading fractionators. Now, the first thing I need to tell you is that this morning I heard a lot of things about the issues that affected the fractionators and the entire world from plasma-derived therapies, that was the viral infection. But I want to ensure you that in the past 30 years, there was not a single viral transmission affecting global fractionators. This was possible thanks to the scientific progresses and the industrial progresses, right? What we have done with scientists, by protecting not just the patients, but even the donors, right? From the selection of the donors to the testing of the material and the final release, as our colleagues said this morning. Now, there are some of these steps that have been already completed, some of the steps that continue to make progresses. Some of the steps you will see in the presentations are stabilizing, and some they have to grow to make this a plasma-derived world in Saudi as well economically sustainable, right? You will see some difference in a minute. Now, first of all, some numbers, right? This is globally a market of over 29 billion US dollars, right? It seems to you a big number probably, but compared to the normal pharmaceutical market, this is the global revenue that comes from a single company in the pharmaceutical world. So that means that there's very, very little market compared to the big pharma market, right? If you think about company like Pfizer, Novartis, the entire revenue coming from the entire world of plasma-derived therapies worldwide is a revenue of a single big pharmaceutical corporation, okay? Now, the growth trends across the different geographies is different, as you can see. Here you see that North America in the past 10 years detected the growth of 45% and almost 6% in the past 4 years. And this horizon includes the period of pandemic also. You will see that during the pandemic, the market was not growing well, primarily because of the plasma collection, but we will talk in a minute about this. So you see that the trend is different country by region, right? And in the past 4 years, the region that was the one that was able to detect the larger growth was Asia and Pacific. And the reason of this is because they were starting from a very, very low level of consumption. All the others had recorded a tangible growth that was from 2019 still a double digit in a range of 23%. Now, how this market is distributed across the different plasma-derived products. From the other two speakers, you heard about the main proteins coming from the liter of plasma. And of course, the product that is driving the entire world of the fractionation and the plasma-derived therapies market and the consumption is immunoglobulins in the two formats, intravenously and subcutaneously administered. So now we have IVIG, what we call immunoglobulins intravenously, and what we call subcutaneous SCIG, the subcutaneous immunoglobulins, but both are standard normal immunoglobulins coming from the same liter of plasma. Now, just the intravenous formulation is driving 47% of these 29 billions that you have seen before. And this is the driver of the fractionation, and this is the driver of the business for all industries. And this is the driver of the consumption out of the liter of plasma. And you will see that is also the driver of my presentation. Albumin is the second largest protein, right? And you will see at the end of my presentation and some of my comments that both products are the one, I'm talking about standard immunoglobulins and albumin, are the one that contribute most to the economical efficiency of the plasma manufacturer, because are the one that cover most of the time the revenue per liter. That is one of the criteria that the industry used to measure the effectiveness of that of this market. I'm sorry, I go back. So the rest of the products are the coagulation factors, and in others there are all the other proteins that we have mentioned before. Now, we tried to simulate what this was the capacity in 2012, and we also tried to forecast and make some expected capacity of fractionation in terms of million liters in 2021. And the way we used to calculate this capacity was to apply a certain yield, means a certain number of grams out of the liter of plasma, because we know what is the global consumption of IVIG in 2021. And we have seen that the capacity in terms of fractionation moved from 32.5 million liters in 2012, growing double digit in 2021, reaching 68 million liters capacity. And here I apply the yield of 3.8, but as we heard before, now the standard is more or less 4, but it doesn't change that much. Now, the industrial capacity increased significantly in the past years, but unfortunately, collection has been heavily impacted by pandemic. As you can see here on the right side of the slide, you see that during the pandemic, the plasma collection in the United States and Europe dropped 40%. moving from an average in the month of 4 to 5 million liters a month to an average of 3. So in other words, the industries lost worldwide over 20 million liters of plasma in a year. You need to know, as I said before, that IVIG is the product that is driving the fractionation. And we are always tight at the industry when we cross-check fractionation, but primarily plasma collection. The throughput is exactly what is needed to cover the demand, but not always around the world. There are still a lot of countries that are suffering about the demand. So in other words, demand is always higher than supply. Or it's better to say, demand is always higher than the ability of the industry and the global manufacturing to supply enough product in the marketplace. Now, this is a normal condition. You can believe now what happened during pandemic. By missing 20 million liters of plasma, we missed a lot of volume of IVIG in the market, and as a consequence, in the following years, we also missed albumin and other plasma-derived products. So, as we heard before from the previous speakers, this is a unique segment because it's never unlimited. It depends on the source of the material. It depends on the donation of millions of donors around the world. But plasma became, and is, and will be, for the fractionators, always the bottleneck for our industry. I'm saying that IVIG consumption is growing. Yes, so you see here on in the graph that the curve is demonstrate how the growth of IVIG is going. So we move it from 2012 till 2021 from 69 tons to over 250 tons. So tons of immunoglobulins, both intravenously and subcutaneously. Now, this is a strong growth that must be sustained by growing plasma collection. Of course, the consumption of IVIG for a lot of barriers that countries might have is different. We move from 324 grams per 1,000 inhabitants in the United States till a minimum of 11.6 grams per 1,000 inhabitants in Latin America. So what is the right consumption? The right consumption is driven by the clinical usage, is driven by a lot of dynamics, is driven by epidemiology, and there is not a right answer what is the right consumption. But if we do have countries with same economies, in Europe and US, for example, that go from 324 to a little bit above 80, there are some differences in the way the doctors use the product, in the way the patients access the care, for sure. And this has to improve. Otherwise, the plasma industry will not be economically sustainable. You will see some examples in my comments on Saudi Arabia in particular. So at the end of the story, the manufacture capacity increases, as you have seen before on the previous slide. And this is increasing because they are following the consumption of immunoglobulins, both intravenous and subcutaneously, primarily. But unfortunately, we still are pretty much dependent of the US collection. From the previous speakers, we heard that 80% of the global plasma collection comes from the US, Europe, and few other countries around the world. That's true, but 70% comes from the US only. And when US has an issue, the global industry has an issue. When US has an issue with the collection, the global patient community has an issue in having much, much more limited access to immunoglobulins and all the other plasma-derived therapies. You have seen here that despite the growth till 2018, again, because of the pandemic, the number of collection dropped up to 43 tons. Despite the number of centers were moving from a range of 400 to over 1,000 in 2021. So in other words, the industries and all the private collection association were forced to build a lot of collection centers in order to mitigate the gaps that was created because of the pandemic. This issue was not really affecting Europe, where the dynamics of collection is a little bit different. But you can see here that Europe takes still only 7% of the collection that is detected in the United States. So the centers are in the range of 150, primarily in Germany, Austria, and a few other countries, Hungary, Czech Republic, a few other countries across Europe, but still not even 3 tons of plasma collected on a yearly basis compared to the United States, right? There is still a huge difference. The reason why US was more affected of the pandemic than the rest of the world is probably, you remember that US government established a social incentive for all the low income that are usually the ones that are more exposed to donation of plasma, and they prefer not to donate, not to leave their house in the period of pandemic, and the collection dropped by 40% from a year to another, right? So this was the real reason. Now, several factors are driving the demand of IVIG, and several areas where IVIG is indicated, right? IVIG is, together with albumin, one of the plasma-derived products that has the much broader range of therapeutic adoption, therapeutic usage. We start from a primary immunodeficiency to the secondary immunodeficiency and all the other neurological disorders in the activity that IVIG does in immunomodulation, right? So now you can see here that the PID is a primary immunodeficiency where there are patients that do not have enough IgG, and the IgG is going to make a replacement therapy. Is taking the majority of the cells of the consumption of IVIG. The PID community is the more largest one, as of course it's a genetic issue affecting people, kids and adults. And the consumption in the PID segment is primarily driven by patients' association, the patient advocacy, and the awareness that both the patient association and the manufacturers are creating to create more knowledge about the use of the IVIG and the benefit that such a therapy can procure to patients, followed by secondary immunodeficiency. In the neurological part, the peripheral nerve syndrome like CIDP and others are the ones that are more responsible for the consumption of IVIG worldwide, but such type of application requires more knowledge. Most of the countries, unfortunately, where consumption of IVIG is still low are those who are not reimbursing the IVIG in that type of area. They are still limited to the use of IVIG only in primary and secondary immunodeficiency, but not in all the other therapeutic indication approved at the FDA and the European Medical Agency, where the larger economy are now reimbursing IVIG in those type of patients. The use of alternative therapies like corticosteroids are not showing the same efficacy and safety than IVIG in this type of patients. As I said before, the consumption per capita of both IVIG and albumin is different across the different geographies. And you can see here on the top the consumption on IVIG, and down you see the consumption of albumin in starting from US, Europe, and some of the key countries, Italy, Germany, Austria, Portugal, Spain, and UK. You see that from the US to the rest of Europe, there is a huge difference. But even within Europe, in all the European countries, there are some difference. And this depends on how the doctors are used to prescribe the immunoglobulins and how manufacturers are used to supply the unmet medical need in the marketplace. There is probably, you can see here, a red line, right? The red line is the consumption per capita in Saudi Arabia. You see now the difference, right? The immunoglobulins, we start with an average of 80 grams per 1,000 inhabitants in Europe. In Saudi Arabia, you are in the range of 17 grams per 1,000 inhabitants. So this makes a difference and might bring some issue in making this plasma-derived therapies business as a sustainable deal in the future for your program of building a fractionation plant. But we'll talk in a minute later on. With albumin, the situation is different. Because with albumin, the consumption in Saudi Arabia, as you can see here, is in the range of 270 grams per 1,000 inhabitants. That this is above some average, even in Europe. That gives me the sense that you are unbalancing the revenue per liter, as I said before. In other words, the global fractionation is driven by IGG, while in Saudi Arabia, the fractionation could be driven by albumin, which will make the entire deal not cost economical. But we will talk in a minute about this. Now, what we expect to detect in the following years about IVIG and albumin is what you see here. So there is no doubt that both products continue to grow for few dynamics. So one, it will be a better knowledge with a better technology, and a larger economies might sustain future growth of IVIG, and same will happen for albumin. You see that in the red box there was a drop, and those are real data plus expectations, because of the pandemic, because of the poor collection, but we expect this to be recovered. The signs are already positive. All the global fractionators start normalizing the collection of plasma. And this will give us a future hope that even the supply is going to be normalized in the next few years. But the fractionation have a call to action. We need to increase collection. We need to harmonize fractionation and purification capacity in order to fulfill all the unmet medical needs and fulfill the demand in all the countries. Regarding albumin, you probably know that China is a worldwide driver of the albumin demand because of the larger users and because of the large number of the population living there. And you should probably know that albumin is the only plasma-derived product that can be re-imported into China from abroad. There are no other plasma-derived products that can be authorized in China, and this is because of the large demand in the country. Now, a few words about factors. You heard that factor 8 as well as factor 9, there are two other driving products of the fractionation. In the case of factor 8, and you see in dark blue, the consumption per capita across some countries, including Saudi, for plasma-derived factor 8 only. And you see in pink, that is all the other novel therapies, like the recombinant, like the long half-life. You see that the consumption of factor A is not that bad. We have seen in the past few years some reduction in the demand of plasma-derived, for what my colleague said before. We have to really look at the demand, trying to make this as an efficient fractionation by lowering the batch size, by purifying the cryopaste that is used to produce factor 8 in order to be efficient with the market demand. But you see that the World Federation of Hemophilia is recommending a minimum consumption per country of 1 international unit per 1,000 inhabitants. And we see here that most of the countries are exceeding such a limiting. So that means that the standard of the access to care it might be acceptable for some countries, but the situation is not this everywhere in the world. As you might expect, a lot of countries in Africa do not have access at all to hemophilia treatment, right? And this is, again, those are, as the other products I mentioned before, life-saving products. Now, finally, a little bit something about the market, in particular in the Middle East and in particular in Saudi Arabia. The same market we have seen before globally generated a revenue of $124 million US dollars in 2019. This is the last report from MRB, is the Market Research Bureau, where we, as a fractionation coordinator take the official data from. So you see here that Saudi is the driver of the entire Middle East market. So that means that Saudi, compared to the rest of the Middle East area, has still a very strong consumption. Still not enough to make this cost economically effective, but however, anyway, the larger one compared to the other countries in the area. So the growth is sensible from 2016, so was a growth at the double digit, so still in the range of 16% year over year. I think this is a tremendous effort that the country is doing with the MOH by improving the access to care for those in need of plasma-derived therapies. So congratulations for this. Now, in conclusion, right? I try to be fast enough to leave some time for questions. So we have in Saudi Arabia a market that, in particular for Saudi, increased by 43.4% from 2016 till today. We have a total consumption in the countries of almost 600 kilos of immunoglobulins, right? And the consumption from 2016 increased by 81.3%. This is a huge increase, but it's still 17.6 grams per thousand inhabitants. So far away than the normal consumption of IVIG should be. Right? So there are a lot of margins to grow. Regarding albumin, we are almost 10 tons consumed in the country per year, so bringing the consumption to almost 290 grams per thousand inhabitants. And this is a very well accepted consumption when we compare the consumption of albumin in Saudi with the rest of Europe, for example. And finally, plasma-derived consumption decreased, as we said before, because of the use of the recombinant. But plasma is equally effective, and there are studies that demonstrated that when this product is used in a large dose prophylaxis, is much less correlated to the incidence of inhibitors that is versus recombinant product. That's one of the issues affecting the therapy of hemophilia A patients. Now, in conclusion, IVIG consumption in Saudi has to grow. And I can give you some numbers why it should grow. We heard from our colleagues, the first speaker this morning, that the ideal capacity or the ideal contract manufacturing or tool manufacturer you want to bring with a company is in the range of, do you remember the number? 150 to 200,000 liters, right? This is for a tool manufacturing. While to build the plant, you need the minimum 500,000 liters capacity. Did you remember this number? Now, you want to know how much plasma you are allocating because of the consumption? Less than 160,000 liters. So, in other words, if the consumption of IVIG is not improved, whatever you do, by building a plant, by building a center, is not cost economical. And you will always continue to lose money, at your Minister of Finance should listen to this. If you improve the consumption per capita of IVIG and you build to an allocated plasma capacity of in the range of 200,000 liters, you can start building a tool manufacturing, and then you can make this cost economical to build the possible fractionation in the future. Now, on albumin, the situation is even worse. Your consumption is quite okay. But if you want to fulfill your demand of IVIG and fractionate 154,000 liters of plasma, that is exactly the plasma you need to fulfill the demand of IVIG, you only produce less than 4 tons of albumin. Why you need 10? That means you fulfill the IVIG and you still need to buy on the commercial market the product, because albumin consumption is higher. So those consumptions need to be harmonized. We are, as global leading fractionation, and all the others might suggest how to do it, and we are always at your disposal, whatever you want to decide to build in the country. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Ferdinando. Excellent talk, and we would like you to join us at the end of the day, the discussion, to come with the recommendation that you just mentioned for the Saudi market. Now, a few changes, because we are under the pressure of stopping 10 to 12 for His Excellency Prime Minister for the opening ceremony. I think we will have to shorten our coffee break because we have two excellent speakers coming, Dr. Fatin and Dr. Salama. If we can, maybe we can accommodate Dr. Fatin talk. Maybe Dr. Salama, if you don't mind, we'll move your talk after lunch, or otherwise we'll take both if you accept to take a short coffee break. Okay, so you decide. You want a short coffee break or you want one talk and then the other one will be after lunch. Now, we can take 2 or 3 burning questions. Otherwise, at the end of the day, we have 45 minutes for discussion. And then we have to also evacuate the front seats. We'll move for the opening ceremony, so we'll move 1 seat back. Thank you. Any burning question, or you want to take a break? So let's go for the coffee break, and then we'll come back probably, let's say 10 minutes. Is that enough? So we can start with Dr. Fatin and Dr. Salam, and then have time for our opening ceremony. Thank you all. Excellent session. Thank you.